find it interesting that in business school, they teach you a lot of great things, strategy, best financial practices, hiring practices, all of that, and all that's great. But one of the things I've observed that they don't teach you is public speaking. And the reason I think that's a big mistake, and the reason I think it's so important, is at some point, leadership comes with a microphone. At some point, you have to stand up and say, hey, here's the product we're rolling out, or here's the new strategy, or here's what's going on, or here's what is the problem that we need to change. At some point, leadership comes with a microphone. And my observation, having spent many years in the business world and having friends now in the business world, now that I'm not in the business world, but in a church world, my observation is that many business people are scared to death of public speaking. In fact, it's the second greatest fear. There's death, we're all afraid of dying, and then there's public speaking. But at some point, if you're a leader, you have to stand up and communicate. And that doesn't mean you have to communicate in front of 100 people. It could be in a conference room of 5 people. But at some point, leadership, literally or figuratively, comes with a microphone. So what I want to do here on the YouTube channel is I want to launch a brief little series called the 5 ways to make your next presentation your best presentation. These aren't the only ways. There's a lot more. In fact, that's one of the reasons I launched a company for business people called Primed, to make you primed and ready to make your next presentation your best presentation. So in this series, I want to talk about the 5 ways. These are some tips that you can use to make your next presentation your best presentation. And especially if you don't do this very often, if like you speak 2 or 3 times a year and it's a big deal though, I want to talk about how you can make sure that when you stand up, you're fully prepared, because the better you prepare, the better you present. So tip number 1, and this is really, really brief, it's really, really simple, but it's so important. The question I get is, when should I start preparing for my next presentation? And my answer is, every single day. You should constantly be in preparation. And the pushback I get is, well, I don't know what I'm even going to talk about. That's okay. You need to constantly be looking for stories, illustrations. If you're out in the field, if you will, if you're at the business, you need to constantly be looking for stories that you go, oh, someday I could use that story. I don't even know what I'm going to talk about, but someday I'm going to use that story or that illustration. Constantly be on the lookout for illustrations or stories or content, so that when the call comes, hey, we need you to speak, when the email comes, we need you to speak on this day, then you can go to your file, you can pull out these stories, and you'll be so much further ahead than if you were just starting cold going, okay, what do I do? Because there's nothing more intimidating to a communicator than looking at a blank screen or blank canvas. So practical tip number 1, always prepare. And one of the best things that you can do is download Evernote. If you're not an Evernote fan, you need to become an Evernote fan, and just have a file that's called Future Talks or Future Presentations. And when you find something, go, oh, I could use that someday, just put that in your file. And then when you get the call, we need you to speak in a couple of months or whatever, you go to that file and you'll be that much further ahead. Now this requires extraordinary discipline. It requires discipline to prepare for a talk that's not currently on your calendar. My experience is, if you'll plan for a talk that's not currently on your calendar, when it shows up on your calendar, you'll be that much further ahead. So that's the first tip to make your next presentation your best presentation. We'll see you next week.